When I was mutilated by the thugs, my wife was feeding her childhood friend/sweetheart mouth to mouth. Before I died, enduring heart-wrenching pain, I used the only arm I had left to call my wife, but was met with her cold mockery. What? Are you begging for my forgiveness? Don't dream. It's all because of your jealousy that Sean Miller's heart condition relapsed. I'm fed up with your petty jealousy. Unless you die, I will never forgive you in my life. The moment the call ended, I closed my eyes in despair. The next day, my wife, who was desperately seeking a heart, obtained one through connections and transplanted it onto her childhood friend/sweetheart like a treasure. Little did she know, it came from me. Later, as the top forensic pathologist, she spent a day and a night distinguishing all my dismembered body parts, but couldn't find my heart. The day after I died, someone found unidentified objects in a diner. After hearing the news, the police immediately sealed off the scene and took all the meat from the diner for inspection. That day, Susan Smith, my wife, known as the top forensic pathologist, quickly identified that 1/3 of it belonged to a human. Detective Miller, the head of the detective unit, said angrily, "The murderer is too vicious to do such an outrageous thing." Susan Smith remained silent. Looking at the things in front of her, she suddenly made a soft hum sound, then picked up a piece of brain and started working again. After stopping, Detective Miller quickly asked, "What's wrong? Did you find any clues?" Susan Smith frowned tightly. "At least 3 days have passed since the victim's death, but there are still brain cells with activity. That is to say, the deceased suffered inhuman torture before death, and the heart tissue is missing from this pile of minced meat." After speaking, her eyes flickered. Detective Miller was shocked and quickly ordered the police officers behind him, "Hurry! Full search! This may be an important clue. Even if we have to dig 3 feet into the ground, we must find the missing heart. Damn it, the higher-ups just issued a ban, and these bastards dare to cause trouble and use such a brutal method, it's simply lawless." Then, he looked at Susan Smith with concern. "Dr. Smith, I heard that you fought with your husband?" An expression of disgust immediately flashed across Susan Smith's calm face. "Don't mention him to me, he hurt others so badly, he should die outside." Hearing this, my heart, now a soul, still felt a burst of pain. She still blamed me for her childhood friend/sweetheart's heart attack. Detective Miller apologized. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring it up, but 2 days ago, people in your neighborhood saw an unfamiliar vehicle entering from the nearby surveillance cameras, and that night was when your husband, John Anderson, had a fight with you and ran away from home. The nearby neighborhood has been checked, and no one is missing, except for the whereabouts of your husband. Do you want to call him?" After a brief silence of a few seconds, Susan Smith's brows relaxed, replaced by a sneer. "That kind of narrow-minded person can't stand me caring about others. He's fought with me more than once or twice, but hasn't he always obediently come back to apologize to me? He just wants to show me his fragile determination this time. Detective Miller, the issue you should be concerned about is the current vicious murder case. This unimportant matter is not worthy of your concern." Hearing this, Detective Miller stopped the words he was about to say, shook his head, sighed, and went to deploy personnel. I smiled miserably, thinking that those quarrels with her would make her realize my dissatisfaction. But now it seems that she just regards me as a clown performing. Susan Smith was immersed in the operating room. Susan Smith hadn't slept for 2 consecutive days to figure out the process of me being turned into a mutilated body. She didn't stop until she felt a headache. At this moment, her phone rang. It was a call from the company's personnel. "Hello, are you Susan Smith, John Anderson's wife? John Anderson has been absent from work for 3 days. If he continues not to come to the company, we will dismiss him." Susan Smith sneered. "He is inherently an irresponsible person, and he also has violent tendencies. It's best to dismiss him as soon as possible. Then can you help us contact him? His phone can't be reached. I'm sorry, I don't have time. If he doesn't go, just dismiss him. After speaking, Susan Smith added, it's best not to hire him again, so as not to endanger the personal safety of your company. The call ended. At this time, Detective Miller came over. Dr. Smith, why don't you go home and rest first, and call your husband by the way? After all, you are husband and wife, and mutual understanding can last. Hearing this, Susan Smith wanted to refuse, but the stinging pain from her brow made it impossible for her to continue, so she had to agree. On the way back, she opened her phone and looked at the call history. At the very top was her childhood friend/sweetheart Sean Miller's phone number, with the note, "My dearest Sean." Looking at this note, I couldn't help but laugh at myself. Obsessed with dissecting corpses, she had been paying attention to Sean Miller's situation during her time at the police station. As for my last call, it was already 3 days ago. That day, Susan Smith took Sean Miller to my house. She specifically called me in advance to ask when I would be back. I bought her favorite necklace. To give her a surprise, I deliberately said I was working overtime. But when I opened the door, I saw the two kissing passionately in the living room. Their clothes were half undressed, and they were taking off each other. I furiously picked up the mop at the door and went to hit Sean Miller. But before I could get to him, he swayed and fell to the ground. Susan Smith, IGN. Owing my questions, immediately called an ambulance, accompanied him to the hospital, and found out he had heart disease. That night, she rushed home to question me, saying that if it hadn't been for my shock, Sean Miller would not have had a sudden heart attack and almost died. But she was blind and heartless. I didn't touch her lover at all. It was clear that Sean Miller's overstimulation during their entanglement caused it. In a fit of anger, I left home, but I never went back. Susan Smith's finger touched my name and unexpectedly clicked on it. I held my breath. Before I died, I set up an automatic voice reply on my phone and tried my best to throw it into the woods. As long as it wasn't found and destroyed by the thugs, as long as Susan Smith called, she would know that I was dead. But a few seconds later, she suddenly dragged her finger, canceled the call, and sneered with a slight hook of her mouth, "You dare to play hard to get with me? Let's see how long you can hold out before begging me for forgiveness. But even if you beg Sean, I will never forgive you." I smiled miserably. She didn't know that I was already dead. Even if I wanted to apologize, it was impossible. Moreover, why did she think it was justified for her to cheat, not only using my heart to save her Sean, but also thinking that I would continue to apologize to her without any bottom line? In the end, I was too tolerant of her, so that she had no scruples and didn't respect me at all. I roared at her angrily, but she couldn't hear me. At this moment, Susan Smith had already arrived at the hospital. In a ward, I saw a haggard Sean Miller. Seeing Susan Smith, his face lit up with joy. As he reached out his hand, he suddenly fell off the bed and coughed heavily. Seeing this, Susan Smith immediately ran forward, held his hand, and, ignoring the dirt on Sean Miller's hospital gown from coughing, desperately lifted him back onto the bed. Seeing this scene, although I knew they had an affair, I still felt a burst of pain for no reason. When I was with her, Susan Smith didn't let me touch her except for the year we got married. But at this moment, she was so willing for him without hesitation. I thought Susan Smith was a clean freak, but it seemed that she had chosen the wrong person. Then, Susan Smith wiped the saliva from the corner of Sean Miller's mouth and apologized. "Sean, I'm sorry. There's been a tragic murder case these past few days, and I need to concentrate on solving the case." Sean Miller immediately sighed. Even someone like you, who is known as the top forensic pathologist, feels it's difficult. I don't know how cruel it is. Hearing this, Susan Smith told him everything that happened at the detective unit without reservation. When he heard that the victim was missing a heart, Sean Miller raised his hand and touched his chest. Susan, do you think, could it be mine? Hearing this, Susan Smith was stunned, then hugged Sean Miller tightly. Sean, don't think too much. There's no such coincidence in the world. Besides, I obtained the heart through legal channels. It couldn't be the victim's. Hearing her full of lies, Sean Miller nodded happily. Yeah, if it weren't for you, Susan, I would have died. So, I believe whatever you say. Susan Smith nodded gently. The two looked at each other, full of affection. At this moment, a trace of worry flashed across Sean Miller's face. Susan Smith asked, Sean, what's wrong? Susan, your husband is too scary. We just hadn't seen each other for a long time and hugged for a while, but he wanted to beat me to death. How could you find such a person to be your husband? Will he come and hit me again? Hearing this, Susan Smith said angrily, he is a petty and jealous person and has always been intolerant of me having any contact with you. But don't worry, it won't happen again in the future. I won't allow anyone to hurt you again. Sean Miller's face lit up with joy, and he quickly said, Susan, does what you're saying mean? After a few seconds of silence, a trace of determination flashed in Susan Smith's eyes, and she said in a deep voice, when he comes back, I will get a divorce from him. Really? Susan Smith looked at Sean Miller dotingly and nodded. The two kissed each other. After separating, she found me in the call history and deleted me without hesitation. I was a little dazed. I didn't expect that she would want to get a divorce from me for Sean Miller's sake. 3 years of marriage had finally come to an end, but I was already dead. She should be happy, right? After all, it could save the step of getting a divorce. At this moment, Susan Smith's phone suddenly rang. After comforting Sean Miller for a few words, she walked out of the ward and answered the call. In the call, Detective Miller's urgent voice came. Dr. Smith, have you contacted your husband, John Anderson? Hearing my name, Susan Smith, who had just decided to get a divorce from me, frowned immediately. Detective Miller, this is my family matter, you. Before she could finish speaking, Detective Miller interrupted her and said in a deep voice, I don't want to interfere with you, but just now, there's a clue about the victim's heart. It's very likely to be related to your husband, John Anderson. John Anderson? Susan Smith narrowed her eyes and sneered, Detective Miller, if it's to investigate the victim's death, I will assist in the investigation, but if you want me and John Anderson to reconcile, there's no need for that. We are getting a divorce soon. On the phone, Detective Miller sighed, Dr. Smith, no matter what your considerations are, you'd better come over. Your analysis is still needed. Susan Smith said coldly, I am currently taking care of someone more important. If there are no clues, or if it's because of other unimportant people, I will no longer assist in the investigation, such as John Anderson. I was stunned. Compared to me, Shikaye. D. Sean Miller a more important person. Hearing these words, I was angry, but what made me even angrier was that she decided to get a divorce publicly without my consent. She had no respect for me. Back in the ward, Susan Smith walked to Sean Miller's side, kissed him gently on the forehead, and spoke in a tone of gentleness that I had never seen before. My dearest Sean, the team has urgent matters to look after me, you should rest well first. Just as Susan Smith was about to leave, Sean Miller suddenly grabbed her hand. Is it because there's news about John Anderson? Susan Smith bent down and hugged Sean Miller with the softest strength, for fear of affecting the compatibility between his and her heart. I will never change what I said before, don't worry, I will always be with you when I come back. Sean Miller smiled with relief, go ahead, I'll wait for you to come back. Susan Smith nodded. When she arrived at the detective unit, the investigation team members were all in place. She sat down in the empty seat. Detective Miller slowly stood up, walked to the conference table, and began to narrate slowly. Comrades, I believe that everyone has been physically and mentally exhausted these days because of that vicious murder case, but we cannot rest until the case is solved. Maybe 1 second later, someone else will be killed. But just now, our informant discovered an illegal transaction record in the black market on the south side, and the time happened to be the time of the incident, and Dr. Smith's husband, John Anderson, was also suspected of appearing there. We even followed the clues and caught a suspect. After speaking, Detective Miller glanced at Susan Smith, then took out a medical self-sealing bag containing a few strands of hair and debris and handed it to her. Dr. Smith, this may belong to your husband. You must be mentally prepared. The sooner the better. Susan Smith took it with a sneer and walked towards the hand experimental platform. But the hand holding the sample bag was trembling slightly. Didn't she hate me? Why would her hand shake? I guess she must be happy. Soon, the test results came out. It was human hair and dermal metabolites. Inside the interrogation room, a criminal suspect honestly confessed to his criminal experience. Detective Miller said in a deep voice, "Where did you take the victim's heart?" Heart? The suspect was stunned and said with a smile, "Officer, you misunderstood. I just kidnapped a child and wanted to ask his parents for some money, but I wouldn't dare to kill anyone." Detective Miller glanced at Susan Smith beside him and slammed the table. "Then, where is the person you kidnapped? Tell me honestly." Before the suspect could speak, Susan Smith said lightly, "Detective Miller, since the victim is still alive, I won't be needed next. My work is done, and I need to go out for something. Please approve it." Seeing that Susan Smith was in a bad mood, Detective Miller didn't say anything else. "Okay, thank you for your hard work, we'll take care of the rest." Outside the interrogation room, Susan Smith pinched a strand of hair in her hand and said lightly, "I knew it. A scourge lasts 1,000 years, it couldn't be you. You must still be hiding somewhere, waiting for me to take the initiative to find you. Such childish tricks." Then, she opened her phone and glanced at the empty phone interface, lost in thought for a moment. At this moment, the hospital suddenly called. "Hello, are you a family member of the patient?" The patient suddenly had a rejection reaction and may need further surgery to stabilize it. "Please come over to sign as soon as possible." Hearing this, Susan Smith immediately panicked and quickly said, "Treat him first, I'll be there right away." As soon as she finished speaking, she drove quickly to the hospital. Speaking of which, we chose this car together, but I didn't like to drive, so she drove it later, and I just slept in the passenger seat. I once jokingly asked her if she would be lonely if I died one day. She said at the time that if I died, there would be no more snoring in the car. I didn't expect that the joke at the time would come true now. Along the way, the car was much faster than usual. I used to always tell her to drive slower. Without my nagging, she drove much more freely. When getting out of the car, Susan Smith habitually reached out to the passenger seat. "Give me water." Susan Smith was prone to thirst when driving, and I would always unscrew the bottle cap and prepare it for her every time we parked. Focusing on driving, she forgot I wasn't there. Looking at the empty seat, she was slightly dazed. Then, she slowly retracted her hand and said coldly, "John Anderson, you better never come back." After speaking, she slammed the car door and trotted into the hospital. Outside the operating room, Susan Smith waited anxiously for more than 2 hours. When she saw the medical staff pushing Sean Miller out and heard that Sean Miller was fine, she walked over with concern. "My dearest Sean, it's good that you're okay. From now on, I won't leave you again until you recover." Sean Miller forced a smile. "Susan, it's so good to see you again, I thought I was going to die." Susan Smith said firmly, "Don't worry, I won't let you die." Then, she said with hatred, "It's all John Anderson's fault. If it weren't for him, you wouldn't have become like this. Sean Miller shook his head. Susan, it's all in the past. As long as you can be by my side, I'll be satisfied even if I only live for a few more years. Susan Smith quickly covered Sean Miller's mouth with her fingers. Sean, don't be afraid. The doctor said that this heart is very compatible with your body, and slight rejection reactions are normal. As long as you get through this period, you will be able to act like a normal person. Yeah, I hope so. Otherwise I really wouldn't want to die, wouldn't want to leave you. Sean Miller Rice. Ed his hand and touched Susan Smith's cheek, and Susan Smith let him caress her, her eyes full of heartache. Half a month later, Sean Miller was discharged from the hospital. During this period, Susan Smith did nothing every day except take care of Sean Miller and go out to buy groceries and cook. My best friend, David White, called her, and I still remember Susan Smith's coldness deeply. She replied to David White at the time, John Anderson caused Sean Miller's heart disease to relapse. I have no contact with him anymore. If you see him, please tell him to come back and get a divorce. Thank you. David White was very surprised by this. Susan Smith, did Sean Miller go to you again? Don't forget that during the flood that year, John Anderson almost drowned to save you. And don't forget that John Anderson has never treated you badly since you got married. For you, he has been attending fewer and fewer gatherings with our friends. For you, he quit his high-paying job outside and went back to be with you. You said you wouldn't be free if you had children, and he has always followed your wishes. You want to get a divorce from him for your so-called childhood sweetheart. Do you have any conscience? On the phone was David White's roar. Susan Smith sneered and said indifferently, I didn't expect him to tell our affairs to others. If I had known he was such a person, I shouldn't have agreed to his proposal, shouldn't have been with such a person. After speaking, she hung up the phone and turned to take care of her Sean. Susan, look, I can get up normally, and my heart doesn't feel uncomfortable either. Sean Miller hugged Susan Smith and said happily, you say, am I the same as a normal person now? Susan Smith nodded seriously, that's right, you're the same as a normal person. Sean Miller suddenly asked, Susan, is there any news about John Anderson? I sneered. He wanted to say, has he come back? Come back and get a divorce quickly. Hearing my name. Susan Smith said coldly, not yet, it seems that he wants to fight me to the end this time. But it doesn't matter, he will show up sooner or later. Sean Miller nodded and then said, by the way, Susan, do you remember that we used to say we would travel together? At that time, my heart was not good, and my parents wouldn't let me go anywhere. Now, we are both free and can do anything we want to do. Hearing the word free, the smile on Susan Smith's lips suddenly froze. Seeing this, Sean Miller asked in confusion, what's wrong, Susan, aren't you happy? Susan Smith recovered her smile, why wouldn't I be happy? Let's fulfill our previous agreement now. Sean Miller said happily, okay. The next day, they embarked on a trip to Hawaii for sunbathing. They didn't take a plane, but chose a train because it would pass through many places they hadn't been to before, and they could enjoy the scenery along the way. Sean Miller's body had not fully recovered to the level of a normal person's physical strength. Along the way, Susan Smith's gentleness had been maintained. I had never seen her so patient. Even as her husband, I had never enjoyed her gentleness. When transferring trains halfway, they stayed in a hotel. As expected, they chose one room. When choosing the bed, Sean Miller wanted a queen-size bed, and Susan Smith chose to acquiesce. From the time they set off until now, I have been watching them being affectionate. From the initial angry roar, it had completely turned into numbness. Even sleeping together didn't evoke much emotion. When Sean Miller went to take a shower, Susan Smith sat on the bed, staring at her phone without saying a word. There was a delivery message on it. I leaned over Susan Smith's shoulder and looked carefully, and remembered that this was the sunscreen I bought for her a few years ago. 2 days before arguing with her, Susan Smith suddenly suggested going hiking. It happened to be the weekend, so I went with her. But the weather, which had originally been overcast, suddenly cleared up when we were halfway up the mountain. The scorching sunlight burned Susan Smith's legs, and I carried her down. At that time, she asked me a strange question. "Honey, guess how much I love you?" I just thought she was teasing me, so I didn't think much about it and replied, "Of course it's a lot of love, we are husband and wife." Susan Smith smiled and said nothing. That night, I came out after taking a shower and saw her smiling at her phone. Thinking she was in a good mood, I wanted to hug her. But unexpectedly, as soon as I touched her, she dodged like a frightened bird and covered her phone tightly, as if afraid that I would see something. Now it seems that her chat partner should have been Sean Miller, but I laughably thought she was talking to her best friend about some private topics. At this moment, Sean Miller, who came out of the bathroom, couldn't wait to sit next to Susan Smith and reached out to hug her. "Susan, what are you looking at?" But to Sean Miller's surprise, Susan Smith subconsciously dodged. Coming back to her senses, Susan Smith looked at Sean Miller's hand, which was frozen in midair, and forced a smile and said, "It's nothing, I just suddenly saw that I forgot to pick up the delivery from a few days ago." "What delivery could make you so distracted?" Sean Miller narrowed his eyes. "It wouldn't be from John Anderson, who made me so miserable, would it?" Susan Smith shook her head. "No, I also forgot what it was, so I was thinking about the things I had bought before." I was a little puzzled. Susan Smith knew what was inside. After all, the recipient's name on the deliveries I used to buy for her was only written as Susan. Hearing this, Sean Miller smiled again and reached out to put his arm around Susan Smith's shoulder. This time she didn't dodge. After a candlelight dinner, the two became entangled. Floating above them, I looked at the scene, and my originally numb heart suddenly felt a burst of annoyance. To this day, Susan Smith and I are still legally husband and wife, but she is now entangled with another man. And this person's body has my heart. I wanted to roar, but there was no sound. I wanted to pull the adulterer and adulteress apart, but I passed through their bodies. But when they were about to take the final step, Susan Smith suddenly grabbed Sean Miller's hand, then put on her clothes and got out of bed. Suddenly interrupted at a crucial moment, Sean Miller felt a burst of irritability and got up and said, "Susan, we've done everything. Is there still a need to care about this last step? Is it because of John Anderson?" Susan Smith said calmly, John Anderson and I haven't gotten a divorce yet. I just want to do it honorably." Sean Miller's tone contained a hint of dissatisfaction. "But haven't we been together behind his back for a long time? Isn't it the same whether we do it or not?" Hearing this, Susan Smith's expression shook. The same anger rose in my heart. "A long time? How long is that? A year or two?" At this moment, Susan Smith looked again at the phone that was still silent, shook her head, and walked to the balcony outside the glass window. A gust of cold wind blew through her hair, making her look a little cold. Sean Miller walked to her side, gently put his arm around Susan Smith's shoulders, and apologized. "I'm sorry, I was too impatient and didn't consider your feelings." Susan Smith said calmly, "Sean, there's no possibility for me and John Anderson to continue, you know that." Sean Miller smiled. "It doesn't matter, you saved my life, and I will always wait." When the train arrived at its destination, Susan Smith was already asleep in Sean Miller's arms. Sean Miller gently kissed her cheek, and Susan Smith, like Sleeping Beauty, slowly woke up. It was very romantic. As soon as they got off the train, Sean Miller eagerly pulled Susan Smith to that sanctuary for couples. Looking at Susan Smith, who had changed into a bikini, Sean Miller was stunned. Susan Smith asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" Sean Miller smiled slightly. Susan, although I know your figure, I didn't expect you to be even more charming in a summer outfit. If my heart hadn't been bad before, I wouldn't have given up and given you to someone else. The someone else he was talking about was naturally me. Susan Smith didn't speak, put on her sunglasses, and lay quietly on the lounge chair, her expression unreadable. Sean Miller was immersed in taking pictures, while Susan Smith took out her phone and looked at the delivery information again, lost in thought. She gently stroked her ankle, where she had been sunburned. Then, she received a call from Detective Miller of the detective unit. I only heard Detective Miller mention the phone. I was shocked. Could it be that the one I threw out before I died had been found? As long as they found the phone, they would know that I was dead. A simpler method was that as long as Susan Smith gave me a call, the automatic reply I had set would tell her the truth. But she hadn't called yet. At this moment, Sean Miller ran over, grabbed Susan Smith's arm, and wanted to take pictures together. This time, Susan Smith didn't go along with him but pulled her hand away. Sean, let's go back tomorrow. Sean Miller was taken aback. But we just got here. The detective unit called. They need my help with a case. Detective Miller wants me back as soon as possible. Seeing Susan Smith's determination, Sean Miller lowered his head. Okay, I'll listen to you. Then, he added, it's good to go back. Maybe John Anderson, that bastard, is already searching the world for you. Going back is perfect for the divorce. Susan Smith nodded noncommittally. He is a bastard. But as she turned away, Sean Miller cursed inwardly, lingering ghost. Once Susan gets divorced from you, you'll be nothing. On the way back, Susan Smith was visibly anxious. But she suppressed it. Without resting, Susan Smith went to the detective unit as soon as she got off the train. Sean Miller wanted to follow, but Susan Smith refused, using the excuse that his body still needed to recover. When Susan Smith arrived at the detective unit, Detective Miller was already waiting for her, and my buddy David White was there too, holding a dilapidated phone. I floated over to take a look. That's my phone! When they saw Susan Smith, they turned on the phone recording and handed it to her. My voice came from inside. 9. My dearest wife, I am your loving husband. First, I want to tell you that I am about to die. I've been turned into a mutilated body, with no way to escape. Second, I want to clarify that Sean Miller's heart condition had nothing to do with me. When I approached him, he was already lying on the ground. Oh, and don't forget to put on the sunscreen I bought you. It's getting hot now, and I won't be there to hold an umbrella for you. Also, you can't cook, so try not to eat things that look too pretty in the future. Most of them have unhealthy stuff in them. Wife, you know what? I love you, otherwise, I wouldn't be so jealous all the time. I hate that about myself, but I really can't control it because you're all I have. There's so much more I want to say, but they're coming this way. No time. Finally, I hope you can be happy and find someone with a broad mind to continue living with you. As soon as the recording finished, David White immediately walked up to Susan Smith and slapped her hard across the face. You bitch! Do you know why John Anderson said you were all he had? Because in that flood, he didn't even have time to save his parents because of you. How could you be so cruel as to cheat on him and hurt him so deeply? If it weren't for you, he wouldn't have left in a fit of pique that night, wouldn't have been so disheartened that he was ambushed and kidnapped. You're a murderer. David White was emotio. NAL, and Detective Miller held him back. At that moment, Susan Smith received a message from Sean Miller. Heart rejection symptoms had appeared again. She raised her head and stared at David White. You make it sound so grand, but have you ever considered that it was all his own choice? He was petty. Why blame me for his death? In the end, it was his narrow-mindedness that ruined him. David White said angrily. Do you have a conscience saying that? John Anderson being with you was the worst decision of his life. Say whatever you want. If my death is even partially my fault, then go ahead and arrest me. If there's nothing else, I'm leaving first. Sean is waiting for me. With that, Susan Smith left without looking back. I smiled self-deprecatingly, never expecting my last words to seem like self-pity to her. I thought she would go straight to the hospital after leaving, but instead, she headed home. On the way, Sean Miller called her again, saying he might die and wanted to see her right away. Unexpectedly, Susan Smith simply comforted him calmly. It's okay, the doctors are with you. You'll get through this. Then, she hung up. Back at home, in our bedroom, Susan Smith locked the door and collapsed to the ground, completely powerless. It was then that I noticed she was still holding my phone in her hand. Only, her hand was shaking uncontrollably. Susan Smith murmured to herself, John Anderson, are you dead? Are you still angry and playing a prank on me? Then, she looked at the phone in her hand and threw it away violently. This phone is so dirty. It's not your phone. You must still be hiding somewhere. Isn't it just that you want me to call you first? Fine, I admit defeat. I'll call you. Susan Smith took out her phone, searched for a long time before finding my phone number, and then dialed it. But the ringtone came from the phone she had thrown away. Then, it was the pre-recorded message I had set up before my death. My dearest wife, I am your love. ing husband. First, I want to tell you that I am about to. Susan Smith cut off the recording and sat on the floor, hugging her phone, tears streaming down her face. I quietly watched her at that moment. Suddenly, my soul dimmed. I felt noticeably sleepy. I knew I was probably about to leave. Perhaps it was my obsession with Susan Smith that allowed me to follow her for so long. All night, Susan Smith went through my phone, but all she saw were photos and videos of us together, even the photo of us surviving the flood. At the time, my parents lied and said they were safe, telling me to save Susan Smith first. I've felt sorry for them all these years. Late at night, Susan Smith fell asleep on the floor until she was awakened by a call. 10. Sean Miller's happy voice came from the phone. Susan, where are you? I made it through another hurdle. The doctor said, as long as there are a few more matches, the heart will be permanently integrated with me. Susan Smith woke up with a start, muttering, the heart, the heart. She seemed to forget to reply to Sean Miller and got up to open the door, ready to leave. But standing at the door was David White. He wanted to scold Susan Smith, but after seeing the dark circles under her eyes, he swallowed the words he was about to say. This is what Detective Miller found. It has John Anderson's fingerprints on it and is engraved with the word Susan. It must have been a gift for you. He was so good to you. I feel sorry for him. John Anderson lost his parents. You were his last family. You need to bury him. Also, Detective Miller has found out where John Anderson's heart went. He's giving you time to take care of John Anderson's funeral arrangements. Think carefully about what you're going to do. With that, David White left. Susan Smith looked at the bloodstained necklace for a long time and finally put it on. Then, she locked herself away for a few more days, seemingly waiting for something, until Sean Miller sent her an other message, saying that after one more surgery, he would completely control the heart. At that moment, Susan Smith's spirits lifted. Okay, I'll come and be with you right away. After sending the message, she looked at the air, as if speaking to Sean Miller, and as if speaking to me. But it was somewhat cold. I was afraid Susan Smith would do something foolish and wanted to stop her, but I passed right through her body. After Sean Miller's surgery, Susan Smith entered the operating room to be with him. He was wearing an oxygen mask and said excitedly to Susan Smith, Susan, I'm about to be reborn. Are you happy for me? Susan Smith smiled slightly and reached for his oxygen mask. Sean Miller was shocked, but because of breathing difficulties, he could only reach out his hand in pain. Susan, what are you doing? Susan Smith said calmly, this heart shouldn't belong to you. It wasn't until Sean Miller stopped breathing that Susan Smith put the oxygen mask back on his face. After leaving the hospital, Susan Smith went to a jewelry store and bought matching couple rings. Back at home, Susan Smith placed the rings on my broken phone and played my last words. John Anderson, don't be angry, okay? Look, I bought you a wedding anniversary gift. Didn't you say I never bought you a decent gift? This time, we have matching couple rings. Oh yeah, will you be lonely by yourself? I'll come and be with you soon, okay? With that, she picked up a razor and suddenly slashed her wrist. In an instant, blood flowed freely. I wanted to shout for her to stop, but she couldn't hear me. As Susan Smith's consciousness began to blur, she looked up in my direction. Am I hallucinating, John Anderson? I think I see you. I looked at her coldly. This isn't a hallucination. Susan Smith was in tears. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have died. I sneered. Don't pretend. Do you think I'll forgive you if you die? To tell you the truth, I've been watching everything you and Sean Miller have been doing. You take care of him every day, take him sunbathing, even sleep together, all lovey-dovey. So, what right do you have to die? You must atone for what you've done. Atonement? Susan Smith choked. But I don't have a chance anymore. You're already dead. I died so miserably, so you'll atone by living in pain. I don't want to be hurt by you even after death. So, you don't have the right to die. Susan Smith wiped away her tears and murmured, I don't have the right to die. I don't have the right to die. Because of excessive blood loss, Susan Smith was already losing consciousness. Fortunately, David White arrived in time and took her to the hospital. And at that moment, my body was almost completely transparent. I knew I was about to disappear completely. I hope in the next life, I can have someone who cherishes me as a treasure.